everybody. Hi, my name is Sonia Exley. I'm going to be chairing tonight's event, Education or Exclusion, the challenges and tensions between school exclusions and children's rights. So this is an event that's being put on by the LSE Department of Social Policy, the Education, Research and Policy Hub within that department. And our aim tonight has been to bring together academic researchers working on the field of school exclusions with education professionals, and tonight in particular legal professionals and experts on school exclusions. So we're very fortunate tonight to have four expert speakers on our panel. First of all, Professor Feyisa Demie, who is an honorary professor at Durham University and the head of research at Lambeth Local Authority. Feyisa has carried out substantial research on school exclusions. He recently published a book, a volume with Routledge, entitled Understanding the Causes and Consequences of School Exclusions. Mathew Purchase, KC, is a barrister at Matrix Chambers, specialising in education, employment, equality and public law. Mathew is a barrister director of the School Exclusion Project. So this is an initiative through which city university law students, partnered with barrister mentors, are providing free legal representation to families who are appealing individual school exclusion decisions. Dan Rosenberg is a solicitor and partner in public law at Simpson Miller LLP. He specialises in children's rights and particularly in relation to education law. And his work covers formal school exclusions, but also cases that are relating to more complex and informal ways that schools are engaging in practices of removing children from educational settings and excluding in more informal ways. Kyann Zhang is a research fellow here at LSE in the Care Policy and Evaluation Centre. Kyann is an economist who has been one of the lead researchers on the ESRC-funded Excluded Lives project. This is a project running in 5 UK universities, so Oxford, Cardiff, Edinburgh, LSE and Queen's University Belfast. And the project's aim has been to explore, the overarching aim is policies, practices and costs of school exclusions across the UK. And Kyann's research has been particularly in the domain of costs, so trying to map the economic impacts of school exclusions for society. Okay, so the way we're going to proceed is that each speaker is going to speak for 10 to 15 minutes. Then we'll open up the floor for questions and discussion. Our aim is to finish by 8 o'clock, at which point we've got a reception that will be happening just outside. And so hopefully as many of you as possible will be able to join us for that. I should make you aware that tonight's event is being recorded. We are hopeful that there will be a podcast later available. For purposes of non-disruption, please can I ask you to switch your mobile phones to silent. Though if you would like to tweet about the event, and please do tweet about the event, this is the hashtag here, LSE Education for the event. And I was also going to say that we are not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm goes off, it is the real deal. The fire assembly point, I'm duty bound to tell you, is outside the building, just round the corner at Lincoln's Inn Fields. But hopefully there won't be any fires, and we can take it away now. Okay, so we're going to start off with Feyisa, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, can I say thank you, Sonia, for really organizing this session. The last time I have done was a conference for head teachers and teachers in 2019, after I finished my research on a school exclusion. it was really well attended with over 300 really people from schools. So it's good to see many people here actually listening on issue of school exclusion. What I'm going to do to talk today is really briefly to share with you answering a number of questions why school exclusion is really a hot issue in England. I hope to really answer how big the problem of school exclusion is in England and who gets excluded. I want to answer, and also what happens to excluded peoples, why exclusion in England is really rising, what can be done to tackle exclusion. That's really what I want to share with you. I don't have really legal expert. I'm not a legal expert. I don't really understand legal issues, but really I would say it's really a big problem. If the source of my evidence is really my book, which I wrote in 2019, and it's still really lovely, and I really interview over 100 people actually to cover the information. The argument I'm really going to make today is school exclusion is a hot issue in England. It continues really rising, if you could really see it here. And if you see the number of permanent exclusion from nearly 5,000 and went down to 6,495, and suspension is also really a big growth over really period of time. There is also about 30,000 fixed period exclusion in people referral unit. People don't talk about those ones. Actually, that's where a lot of major problems are. And recently, also, the government agenda is to really develop a number of alternative provisions. Alternative provision is really a problem. Children are supposed to be educated in schools, and for some reason, for a number of reasons I'm really going to talk later, children are really being excluded from education and really pushed in that angle. I'll give you a number of reasons why that is really the case. Generally, a heavy exclusion in terms of really secondary school, you could really see up there in terms of really evidence. A bit gone down, but still rising. And also, there is also in special schools, there are really big exclusions in terms of statistical evidence. So, in some ways, secondary sector are really a major problem in terms of exclusion. In my understanding is in primary sector, it shouldn't exclude at all children, but that's really the reality we see most of the time. I really want to say something about disproportionality of exclusion. There is no equal opportunities these days. I think heavily some groups are really excluded in school for a number of reasons. Is particularly you could really see a Black Caribbean children and Gypsy and Roma are really very excluded. Gypsy and Roma are really small number. The Black Caribbean are really a bit worrying. In some way, it's something which should not happen. A number of children of Black Caribbean origin have really been excluded from school. You could see really the statistical evidences here in terms of other groups which are really again being excluded heavily are mixed white, Black Caribbean, mixed race children. So there is race dimension when you look at actually on exclusion issue. I want to also look at by all ethnic group across really a country. This is recent data which is available through the FE. The same group every time, Gypsy, Roma, travelers of Irish origin, white and Black Caribbean children are really heavily excluded. And this is really a big issue. The same in suspension, as you could see, is really a major problem. If you also look by free school meals, which is disadvantaged children, again, a lot of same children are really heavily excluded, if you see here. And that's really, again, a worrying thing. Particularly, a number of sane children have been pushed to really alternative provision. I'll talk about the reason why this is the case. It's important to understand about the English education system. The English education system is really outlier of every developed country education system. In many countries, if you go in developed countries, including USA, Northern Europe, and even in Wales and Scotland, local authority runs really education. In England, it is the Secretary of State actually run education now. Is a Secretary of State is really accountable education system. So we moved into education market, which actually affected hugely. As you can see from this governor comment, the government has reduced state education in England to quasi-market, where children and the family are really a customer. This is really some of the view I get when I actually interview. The school are judged on the national test and examination result, which is really GCSE, which is published last week. It's really important for schools to survive. Actually, they really need to compete with other schools. And also austerity and funding cut didn't help. There is not enough money to run in a school. The result is a school cannot really manage them. They really push them out in the best really they can. You know, that's really a huge problem in terms of really budget cut. You could see some of the comment of the chair of governors are actually saying about budget issue, money issue. Poverty is a major problem. With no doubt, poverty is a major factor, particularly in London, is really a big issue. There is also increasing number of children with many complex issues, which you could really understand, which need to be really managed really at school level. This is very interesting. The fragmentation of education system in England didn't help. What you could see is there are not a number of academies really a state school. If you see the red line bar here, there are only state-maintained school, which really the council running. The rest of the blue one are actually were suspended are in academy sector. You could really see one of the school in Northern England have actually suspended 41% of the school population. This is unacceptable. If you go and really play a game with the DFE data, you could really find many of those really bad news, which is not acceptable, between 20% and 40%. It's only 5 in state local authority maintained school where children have been excluded. The rest, about 40 of them out of 45, are really in academy sector. So the fragmentation education system didn't help. Academy change, academies PRU are not accountable to the local system. As a result of fragmentation, many students were excluded. This is a view of the parent really I interview, which is, you know, and academies are using exclusion to improve also the examination result. I'll tell you, one of the reasons I have done this research was I found one school who excluded permanently 60 children, so-called superhead, actually to improve its GCSE. It didn't improve its GCSE, it didn't last more than 1 year. It'd be money, the governing body money to push him out. So that's really a play which actually going within the school system. Off-rolling is a major problem. I'm almost there. And if you could see, particularly around year 9 and year 11, a lot of children are offloaded from the system. Again, there is nothing else except improving GCSEs. I will conclude now and saying some of the key messages. That, there is a growing number of exclusion in England, and no doubt, ethnic disproportionality is there. Academies are having exclusion rate than the local authority, Black Caribbean mixed rate, and also Gypsy and Irish traveler are really heavily included. The reason that all these exclusions are because of really the league table and the education market agenda of the government, fragmentation of the education system, off-rolling, teacher law expectation, institutional rational. There are a number of things you could do to address these issues. The first thing is, in my view, we need to stop off-rolling of children from school. That needs to be really stopped. DFE should really review its league table and actually encourage using a different system in terms of encouraging inclusion in terms of really exam publication. Lack of funding, schools don't have enough funding. There's so much struggling with budget. The roll number has really gone down now. Government is a responsibility, central government really to support same children, particularly at school learning. Behavioral problem, training is really needed on these issues. A leadership challenge also is necessary. Leadership must need committed to inclusion strategy and diversity and equality. That it should be really the agenda of the really head teacher and the really governing body. Should be revised of inclusive policy, and also there is a need of targeted support of these children really at the school level instead of them pushing out really to alternative provision. So we have alternative provision scandal. Children should be educated in school. Children should not rush to be excluded actually from the school system. My message for the really government, whoever listens this is, school needed more resources to tackle exclusion issues. And an alternative provision is not the way forward. I stop here. I hope I didn't overrun.
Good evening. As you've heard touched on, there are broadly two ways in which children are excluded in the broad sense from schools. There is the system under which they are formally and officially excluded, where the head teacher says, you're excluded. And then there are various other less clear ways in which children are effectively removed from the school environment, which Dan is going to talk about, which, depending on your point of view, are either sneaky ways of achieving improper objectives or helpful way of letting the child have a fresh start without an exclusion on their record. I'm going to be focusing on the first sort of exclusions, official school exclusions, and I've got the slightly dry task of taking you through the legal means by which you can challenge those decisions, and just some thoughts that I have about the advantages and disadvantages of them. I'll say at the outset that I think very few people would say that the current system is entirely satisfactory. Many people would say that the current system is entirely unsatisfactory, but it is what we've got and what we have to work with. So I'm going to talk first about what I've called the standard process. So this is the route that's available to any parent or guardian of a child who's been excluded from either a mainstream local authority school, or indeed any maintained local authority school, or an academy. Doesn't apply to independent schools. And just for your information, these are sort of the main legal resources which set out the various rules and procedures. I'm going to describe it to you in three stages. The first is the decision. Under the law, the decision has to be made and can only be made by the head teacher. So it can't be made by any other member of staff at the school. Secondly, as a matter of law, you can only exclude a child on disciplinary grounds. So if in fact schools are excluding children on academic grounds because they want to keep the children who are going to get better exam results, that is straightforwardly against the law. It is not allowed. It happens all the time. The difficulty is in proving it, but it's not allowed. Then there is some assistance in the governmental guidance as to what the test should be for permanent exclusions. There should be permanent exclusions only where there is a serious breach of the school's behaviour policy or a number of less serious breaches which builds up. And allowing the pupil to remain at the school would seriously harm either the education or the welfare of other pupils or other people of the school. So that can include teachers, obviously, if the pupil is repeatedly assaulting teachers and that sort of thing. That's therefore the base threshold. If those conditions are met, you obviously don't have to exclude the child. The head teacher still has a discretion to provide additional support or do whatever else might be needed to try and keep the child at the school. There is then a duty on the head teacher to inform the parent and guardian and various other people without delay of the duration of the exclusion, the reasons, and the right to make representations to the governing body. That takes us on to stage 2, which is that the governing body or a committee of the board of a trust which runs an academy then typically will have a duty to consider whether this child should remain excluded or should be reinstated. There are some circumstances in which they won't have that duty, typically shorter periods of fixed term exclusions or suspensions, which don't add up to 15 days in a school term. In those circumstances, the governing body has to consider any representations made by the parent, but doesn't actually have to do anything with them. But in most cases, particularly permanent exclusions, the governing body has to address that issue properly. And their function essentially is to decide, as I say, whether or not the pupil should be reinstated. And what that means is that they have to retake the decision that the head teacher has taken. I've noted in the parentheses there that there's a section in the government guidance which suggests that all they have to do is consider whether the head teacher's decision was lawful, reasonable and procedurally fair, which sort of implies a sort of standoffish review of the head teacher's decision. That's not, in my view, the right approach, and it's not, to be fair, the approach which is normally taken. The governing body has to decide for itself should this child be excluded or not. And to do that, they may have to undertake a fact-finding exercise to decide what actually happened. You may have, say, a child who's been excluded for fighting, who may say, actually, I didn't punch Joe. Somebody else in that melee punched Joe. And the head teacher's got a handful of statements from some anonymised students saying, I saw this student punch Joe. And the governing body's going to have to decide what the truth is or not. But they won't typically hear evidence. You won't, as in a court system, have people come along, give their evidence, be questioned about it. It'll usually all be on paper. Quite often, as I say, you won't even know precisely who has written the statement that the head teacher is relying on. How does that work then? The governing body has to arrange a meeting, usually within 15 days. The parents are allowed to be represented at that meeting by anybody they like. There should be a process of asking for written evidence in advance and then collating that into what we lawyers call a bundle and sending it out at least 5 days before the meeting, if possible. There's then obviously a similar duty to inform of the decision and why. If the decision is against the parents, then they have to tell the parents they've got a right to apply to a review panel or to make a claim under the Equality Act. So just pause in there. What are some potential problems with this? Well, obviously, firstly, typically the governing body of a school will have a relationship with the head teacher. They need to work together, they need to get on, they will be engaging with each other all the time. So it's difficult, really, however hard they try, and a lot of them really do try, but it's difficult for a governing body to be genuinely independent and to reach an impartial decision on these things when the head teacher has already made the decision. Because if they say the head teacher was wrong, that's going to undermine their relationship. There are often difficulties in practice in terms of obtaining evidence, both in terms of getting the actual evidence that you need, but also getting it sent out to you in good time. As I said, they're supposed to send it out with 5 days space between the sending and the hearing. Often that doesn't happen, sometimes because it's unavoidable, but sometimes because, to be honest, they're not really always on top of getting this sort of thing done. It can be difficult to get a fair hearing in these sorts of cases, even leaving aside the potential bias problem, just because, again, through no fault of their own, these governing bodies are not typically experienced in, and they're not trained in, taking evidence, making findings of fact, what's needed to make a fair hearing or not. The quality of the evidence is often poor, and as I've said, it's often anonymised. The third stage is an independent review panel stage. That only applies to permanent exclusion, so you can't get to that stage if you're on a fixed term exclusion of any sort. In the old days, these panels used to be called independent appeal panels, and then I think in around 2012 the name changed, and the reason why the name changed is because their function changed. Originally, they could completely reconsider the decision, make their own findings of fact. Nowadays, they can only review the decision that the governing body has made. They've got a frankly perplexing range of powers. They can obviously uphold the decision of the governing body. They also have a power to, quote, recommend that the governing body reconsider its decision. And there's nothing in the law or the guidance which really says how or when that sort of power should be exercised. Interestingly, there is some case law from the High Court which says that actually recommend in this context really means you have to do it. So it's more in the nature of a direction than a recommendation, but recommend is what the actual language is. Their third option is that they can apply judicial review principles, and if they find that one of the judicial review grounds is made out, they can quash the decision and direct the governing body to reconsider it. Now is not the time for me to go through the judicial review principles, but they are very, very complicated, and they are constantly on the move. But what they are essentially about is trying to secure that the decision was lawful and not bonkers. But they're not a way of sort of second-guessing the rights and wrongs of the decision. They can also direct a note to go on the pupil's record. So, for example, as I've said, they can't actually reinstate the pupil, but if they were really sure when they heard the evidence that the pupil hadn't done what he did, in theory, they could put a note on the record to that effect. They can also order essentially a fine on the school if they have quashed the decision and directed the governing body to reconsider it, and the governing body doesn't do that, or does reconsider it but then decides not to reinstate. And again, this is quite a curious power, really, because the whole point of directing the governing body to reconsider it is that almost by definition, they could reach the same decision, taking into account whatever the independent review panel has said, but they may get fined if they do that. So, again, just a little bit about the process. In many ways, it's better than the governing body process, partly because you've got a panel which is at least notionally genuinely independent. One of the panel will be a lawyer, one will be an existing or former head teacher, one will be an existing or former governor. You can apply to have a special educational needs expert there if you want one, although, again, their role is very weird, because what they're not actually allowed to do is assess whether a pupil has special educational needs or not. They seem to be only there to give some sort of generalised advice about what special educational needs are and how they can affect people generally. And there will be a hearing, but it's usually conducted in a rather more structured and open and fair manner than governing bodies, just because of the experience of the people involved in it and their familiarity with these sorts of procedures. So, what are the issues here? Well, as I've said, the panel is definitely more independent than a governing body will be, but there's still, I think, a curiosity about the idea that you've got a lawyer, yeah, okay, who won't have any interest in this on a personal level, and should be neutral. But then the two other members of the panel are both, if you like, school-focused members. They are people who come from a background where they are potentially, at least, more likely, even subconsciously, to be thinking about the school rather than the pupil. And there'll be nobody on the panel who comes from any sort of background of protecting pupil rights or from a special education needs background, apart from the expert who hasn't got any decision-making power. There is the problem of just the sheer complexity of the jurisdiction as well, particularly for parents who haven't got representation and are trying to negotiate this by themselves. And the limits on the powers, I think, are also a problem. So you've got more independence but less powers by the time you get to this stage. Well, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes dealing with an alternative way in which you could bring a claim in relation to a formal exclusion. And that's under the Equality Act 2010. And the Act basically splits claims in relation to exclusions into two categories. The first is disability discrimination. Now, in those cases, you can bring a claim to the first tier tribunal, which is a formal judicial body, although it too has input from real world educators, not just judges. There's a 6-month time limit to do that, so you've got a lot more time to do it than you have to appeal to the governing body or the independent review panel. Just a quick word about what disability is. I mean, we often think of disability in the colloquial sense, and think that it's quite a serious problem with someone's sort of abilities. In the statutory sense, it's quite a low threshold. All you need to show is that you've got a physical or mental impairment, which is anything not quite right with you physically or mentally, which has a significant adverse effect on your ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And sorry, it's substantial, not significant. But in this context, substantial only means more than minor or trivial. It doesn't mean it has to be particularly grave or serious. So the reality is a lot of people with special educational needs will also have a disability because they'll have that sort of mental impairment. There are various claims available, but in most exclusion cases, it will be a claim for discrimination arising from disability. And that means that if the reason you were excluded had some connection with your disability, the school would have to prove that the exclusion was proportionate. Not just that it was broadly reasonable, but that it was proportionate in all the circumstances. Now that's a much higher threshold, certainly than would be applied by an independent review panel applying judicial review principles. So that can be very helpful. The first tier tribunal is also available for considering prior failures to make reasonable adjustments for disabled pupils. So if you can see potential exclusion on the cards and the school isn't doing enough to support the child in question, you can bring or threaten to bring a claim under the Equality Act to get them to make adjustments to their policies or their practices to provide that support in advance. You could also rely on such a claim in connection with an exclusion claim if the exclusion has already happened, and you could say the exclusion wouldn't have happened if I'd been properly supported. Just a couple of disadvantages of this approach. I think the main ones are the delay and that there's a greater degree of formality in the process. If you want to bring a claim for race, sex or any other form of discrimination, you have to go to the county court, I'm afraid, which is really not very attractive in most of these sorts of cases. There's still a 6-month time limit in those cases. There are bigger powers in the county court, and of course you've got properly independent judges, but of course you will have greater delay in getting your claim through. There will be costs to think about, because typically if you lose your case in the county court, you will have to pay the costs of the other side. And obviously there's a lot more formality in county courts, which make it less pleasant or a more unpleasant experience for people who are having to go through it. So that was all I was going to say. Obviously any questions, I'm probably best deal with them at the end. Yeah, thank you.
So what I'm going to do is talk about routes to getting kids out of school and or out of lessons without formally excluding them. There are many, many ways to do this. Schools generally know them all, whether or not they use them all. And the aim of the talk is for people to understand what these methods are, effectively how they work, and also for people to understand the data that exists on some of these methods. So what I'm going to talk about, off-site directions, typically to alternative provision, as previously discussed, managed moves, suspensions, which I think we've covered to some degree, the use of isolation as a sanction, traditional, as I call them, unlawful exclusions, and then the last bit is making life so miserable, untenable that children can't stop coming to school or their parents pull them out. And then I'm going to speak briefly about a couple of other slightly less problematic routes for kids being out of lessons or mainstream classes, often either on a very temporary basis or because they're actually getting some extra support. I'm going to start with off-site directions. They sort of do what they say. Children are directed to be educated off-site. It is supposed to only be used to improve children's behaviour. It should not be used as a sanction. It often is. Interestingly, there is primary legislation, regulations, guidance, full works that applies to maintained local authority schools. There's no legislation whatsoever that applies to academies. There is now, which there wasn't previously, detailed guidance on it in the school exclusions guidance, and there's also alternative provisions guidance. Academies are encouraged to follow this guidance as well as, which effectively mirrors the law. And the key thing about off-site directions is often they are not used for temporary basis to improve a child's behaviour. They used normally, insofar as I see them used, and obviously I get a biased selection, to get children out of school permanently. It doesn't go on the exclusion statistics. I think Feyisa gave the statistics for about 13,000 on the figures he had, children in alternative provision. Most of them will have been put there through off-site directions. That's double or treble the number of kids permanently excluded, so it's actually more important. And the other, particularly given that lots of them don't go back, the other point to note is that they're often internal alternative provisions or pupil referral units within academy chains. So it's easier for them to do it. You don't have to negotiate with anybody to put them there. One of the reasons that direction to off-site can be attractive for schools is that the parents don't want their children to go. And this particularly applies when children are being directed to attend a pupil referral unit. So in practical terms, that is no different than being excluded, permanently excluded, because that is where they will go if they're permanently excluded. And particularly for children in Key Stage 4, i.e. years 10 and 11, the assumption very often is that they will not come back once they are off-site directed to improve. Often children drop out. The parents might be worried about going to a particular pupil referral unit. I won't mention the ones in South London, which my clients are most afraid of, but they would rather, for their kids' safety, that they were out of school than in some of these places because of the risks of recruitment into gangs and so forth. The bonus for that, from the school's perspective, is that they don't actually even have to pay for the alternative provision at all. And there is, so far as I'm aware, very little analysis of the data, the characteristics of people who are off-site directed, and or whether they actually go to wherever they directed. People aren't looking at that by race, free school meal status, disability, etc. in the same way as it's being looked at for exclusions. Managed moves, these can be a good idea. Fresh start. It's now supposed to be a permanent move to a new mainstream school, so permanent and mainstream. And that's often good for kids, particularly if they've fallen into, how can I put it, problematic company. It can only be done in the children's best interests. It needs to be with the agreement of all concerned, including the parents. So when I've dealt with it, the parents weren't impressed. One of the head teachers said to me, "It's a managed move, I'm the management," or they said to the parents, sorry, "It's a managed move, I'm the management, and your child's moving, it's a managed move." And the mum was not impressed because she said, I've gone to church for many years to get my child into the school. And I'm not moving though. Interestingly, in that case, there are 4 kids who were all caught vaping. The 2 white kids were let straight in. The 2 black kids were told that they were going to be managed move. One of the other black parents actually took their child out of the country. And the one who came to me, I think, was actually a social worker with a charity who the school had slightly underestimated. They dealt with in the school exclusions guidance. There should not be managed moves to the local pupil referral unit. That is what happened in the past. The new guidance effectively stops that. It's a move to a new mainstream school. That's why off-site directions are even more important for schools as a way of getting kids into pupil referral units. Can't pressure parents into putting their kids into managed moves. Ofsted's not impressed if they do that. And around managed move, they're still, even though it's supposed to be a permanent move to a new mainstream school, in the past, what had previously happened, and the practice still continues, is that they were sort of on probation at the new school and they could be kicked out of the new school for behaviour or actions far less than would lead to a permanent exclusion. And then they bounce back to the first school, and then the first school often tries to stick them in alternative provision or similar. So that is a problem. By way of legal analysis, effectively, the school to which they moved to is acting unlawfully and pushing them out in an informal way, but that still hasn't totally changed despite the change in the school exclusions guidance. Suspensions, it's always been there, it's already been dealt with to a large degree. I'm not going to deal with the disproportionality. The point to note is that there's a limit on the total number of suspensions, both in the school year and days in term, and that therefore makes it attractive for schools to put kids in isolation or internal exclusion or various other things that have the same effect as a suspension, i.e. they are not in any lessons, not receiving education, but they don't go on the stats and it doesn't count towards the totals. Isolation, internal exclusion. There are many companies who are seeking to sell isolation booths. I found some of their marketing materials and thought I'd show you what they look like. Isolation, it's effectively when children are removed from the class and put in a separate, effectively, punishment room, normally with a number of other similarly punished children. It's been renamed, rebranded in the 2022 Behavioural Advice to Schools. It's called Removal. The isolation rooms, they've got numerous different names in different schools, but they effectively the same thing. It's supposed to be a serious disciplinary sanction. It's supposed to be for a limited time only. The new behavioural advice, I strongly encourage people, particularly any teachers or academy trained people, to read it. It's actually quite sensible. There was previously more or less no guidance. And that's how it should be used, i.e. very short term when a kid's kicking off in the lesson put them somewhere and get them to calm down, go back to the next lesson, shorter period of time as possible. However, it's still used in a traditional, so to speak, way to get difficult kids out of lessons, often for whole days or multiple days set in advance. Often if you fail the day in isolation, which many children do, you then get another day in isolation. It's particularly hard for children with ADHD. Fine. It gets the kids out of class, it doesn't count towards the termly or annual limits, it doesn't show up on central government statistics, it's an internal school matter only. But schools keep very, very good data on all of this. I should also add, it is cheap because you can put 15, 16, it takes a little bit more room than a normal classroom, kids with the highest level of needs in one room. You've got one person supervising them, normally while they're doing some other work, and you don't have to do very much, it doesn't cost you much, because the aim of the game is not so much to worry about those kids and what results they will get, it's trying to improve the results of the other kids by avoiding having to put input and effort into the children you're sticking in internal isolation or exclusion. Unfortunately, often there are serious mental health impacts for the children who are stuck in these booths. I've acted for numerous children who've attempted suicide, who've had deteriorating mental health as a consequence of this, a number of whom actually, who attempted suicide while stuck in these booths. And the other thing about the use of this internal exclusion, if used repeatedly, and particularly for children with neurodiversity or underlying mental health issues, it unsurprisingly makes them reluctant to attend school, or parents reluctant to send them in if they can see what the impact on them is. It therefore leads to them effectively being pushed out or not coming in much, which has, so far as the schools are concerned, whether or not that's how they think, the result that left effort needs to be spent on these children. I'm going to deal briefly with traditional unlawful exclusions, which are the type that Feyisa mentioned, the off-rolling that he mentioned. It actually comes up less now than it did in the past, because you can fail your Ofsted for doing it. The Ofsted inspection framework makes that clear, as does the school exclusions guidance. So traditional unlawful exclusions, if you don't withdraw your child, I'll exclude them, you can't return to the school, otherwise I'll exclude them, and so forth, i.e. pushing children out. However, there are smaller, regular unlawful exclusions of children kicked out at lunchtime, particularly in primary school, children with special needs with their parents being told to pick them up, and so forth. Particularly children with SEN, that is standard, that happens all the time. Making life miserable, stroke constructive exclusions. So this, again, it relates often to children with mental health problems, neurodivergent children, children who've had adverse experiences in childhood. It's effectively, a lot of them either get pushed out or don't come in or start refusing to go to school as a result of the way that they are treated. Either they're not educated, they're not helped, they are sanctioned, particularly in schools with relatively sort of zero tolerance type policies. It's a lack of support. It's all of these things put together, threatening parents for with prosecution of non-attendance. All of these things put together lead to children either not going to school, parents withdrawing them, and so forth. Again, you don't have to expend resources if this is the way that you're going. And what I would say is that the problem with these children, not attending, it's external. So far as the schools are concerned, it's externalised, because most of the schools, particularly secondary level, are now academies. So previously, head teachers and local authority officers, they had one boss, the council's director of education, or one ultimate big boss. That's no longer the case with academies. So there is not that commonality of purpose. Briefly, slightly more positively, because I realise I've been fairly negative, slightly less problematic forms of exclusion or getting kids out of lessons. The first one is something my daughter told me about, relocation. Instead of putting them in the isolation booths, what you do is you tell them you're out of the class until the next lesson. Off you go, find them, you've got to go into another class in the corridor. Come back to me at the end of the lesson and do the work I've set. Another thing is the proper use of removal, i.e. when a kid is unable to regulate themselves in lesson, doing it for as short a period of time as possible. And then most obviously providing the kids with extra support. That ultimately is the solution, particularly with in-school units and extra support, smaller group teaching. However, having said that, that doesn't mean you can do, as I was telling people earlier in the letter for action I was writing today, Mum has no objection to small in-school units, smaller classes. You can't just do it part-time because it's cheaper. You can't have a morning session and an afternoon session. That's, I suppose, unlawful exclusion. The key thing is proper support in the first place, and some of that goes to resources, some of that goes to the philosophy of the schools. My last slide for all the researchers out there is on data. Schools keep it's not just exclusion data, schools keep extremely detailed data on everything related to behaviour. That includes detentions, it includes sanctions, it includes the use of isolation, it even includes demerits or merits. All of this is on their systems. It should be analysed by schools, it should be analysed by multi-academy trusts. I've given some references in the Behaviour Advice School Exclusions Guidance. There's an issue in that there's no explicit reference for local authorities viewing this data. Part of that is because obviously the President of that government doesn't believe that local authorities should have very much to do with education, but it is a missed opportunity given the interests of local authorities in the kids in their area not effectively being let down. There are many areas for potential investigation. Obviously, you can compare schools within the same academy chain. Schools can look at individual teachers in terms of sanctions. People who understand statistics better than me can spot whether or not, for example, there is what is termed institutional racism. People might believe that that is an issue. People might wish to look at the statistics and compare. You can even look at it at individual teacher level, because the level of data, the number of data points that you're getting is so much more than just for exclusions. And one can also look at dual discrimination as well. Schools have to, the data is collected, but what people need to do is collate and analyse the data. My view is that there's, under public sector equality duty, this is what they should be doing. It's the most obvious thing to look at if you're looking at complying with your public sector equality duty and ensuring that there is participation in public life, i.e. people are not excluded who have particular characteristics. And that is it. Thank you.
Thanks for staying to me. So my name's Kyann, and I'll be talking about the cost of exclusion. This mainly comes from the work that I did for a project called Excluded Lives. And I think it was described at the beginning. So it's about exploring causes and consequences of school exclusion and experiences of the young people involved. And there's a website if you want more details. So it was a joint exercise, so it's multidisciplinary, and it's across the 4 jurisdictions of the UK. I think most of the stuff that we talked about tonight is mostly England focused, so this is across all 4 jurisdictions, so there are different universities in each of these jurisdictions, and what the LSE, our involvement is mainly to look at the economics, as the name suggests. So we had different strands, and so most of the other strands, the bulk of this project came from interviews and surveys that they did with stakeholders. So they went into schools, they went into they talked to alternative providers. So they talked to teachers and parents. They talked to students as well. And so most of the costs and calculations that I've worked on uses data from those, from what they've collected. So when we first sort of conceptualized how we're going to calculate these costs, we thought, okay, so we split them into short-term and long-term. So, you know, you look at the cost of the exclusion process and then the cost of providing alternative education. And then you look at the costs, you know, to other people involved, not just to the schools, but also to the parents, caregivers, etc. And then we look at the long-term costs, which are wider societal costs. So, you know, further down the line, if you get excluded, you're more likely to be unemployed, you're going to have mental health problems, you're going to be more involved with criminal justice, you know, all of that. And that seemed to make a lot of sense to us at the beginning. And then we found out that it's a lot more complicated than that. So we're probably a little, I don't know if you can see that, that's not helpful. But this is sort of just trying to illustrate the complications that sort of come up when we talk to people and say, well, can you sort of give us a typical pathway that a student will follow when they get excluded? So this is when we're talking about the cost of the exclusion process. And they sort of come back with, well, there is no typical pathway, you know, so this, they might identify a student that's at risk of being excluded, and then the school might decide to introduce some sort of preventative measures so that they don't get to the stage where they will be excluded. In other cases, they might try a temporary exclusion, you know, just for the students to see if they'll call off, whether that's in school or out of school. So there's a whole, you know, range of ways that can go. You know, they might try one temporary exclusion, they might try two. So it just sort of became very obvious very early on that it's going to be very complicated. And also, what we learned is they don't really sort of have an end goal in mind when the students do get excluded. So, you know, whether the goal of putting them into an alternative provider is to get them back into school, or whether they're going to be there until, you know, they're of legal age to leave school. So, so sorry about the fact that you probably can't be that, but yeah, it's just to show that, you know, there are all different ways that it can go. So what we did is we sort of came up with a number of case studies, and this is based on the interview data. So, you know, we took real experiences from students, from teachers, from parents, and then each member of the project team from the different jurisdictions, they put together something like an example of a pathway, and they're sort of constructed from different individuals because we don't want anyone to be identifiable. So this is also supplemented by team members' prior knowledge. So, you know, things that are involved, such as you know, review panels and planning meetings and things like that. And then we applied unit costs that are mostly from public sources, so from, you know, teacher pay scales, from Office of National Statistics. Yeah, so I think I've already mentioned that there's challenge to define the typical pathway. And what we found is, even though schools, you know, apparently keep very good data on characteristics of students, they don't really have that much record of how much time teachers are spending dealing with exclusion. So, you know, they probably take that as part of, you know, their day-to-day activities. But when we sort of break it down, it is a lot of time that they have to spend dealing with the admin, dealing with communications. So, and that's something that a lot of existing studies don't really take into account. So they will talk about, well, there's the cost of alternative provision, and then, you know, there's costs to the school, but then they don't really talk about, you know, how much time is involved from parents, for example. So, you know, you take a student out of school, someone has to supervise them because they're still minors. You know, does that mean the parents have to take time out? And all of these costs, there isn't really sort of like an overarching framework about what should be included and how they should be applied. So this is just sort of an example of a section of the processes that sort of go into go into the exclusion process. So this is sort of at the very beginning. So, you know, you might start with monitoring. So the head teacher might talk to, you know, communicate with parents every week, and then they see that if there's any improvement, behavioral support, counseling, you know, so there's all of these people involved, and you would have heard from, you know, the previous a few talks, you can probably guess there's a lot of people involved, and also the way that these meetings and these processes are carried out, they would vary from from local authority to local authority, and in between schools as well. So you know, the more we sort of try to break down these things. So for example, when we're talking about, you know, if you're talking about a child planning meeting, for example, well, so my question to them would be, so how long would that take? They say, oh, well, you know, the meeting probably takes place once a month, an hour, but then you have to have all the time preparing paperwork, and you know, there's all of that. So it was really, you know, teeth pulling exercise trying to get all the information out so that we can sort of break it down and try to cost them. And yeah, so you know, you can see that there's quite a lot of costs for, you know, this is just one example. Not everyone's going to be like this. Like, you know, I haven't included costs of lawyers, for example. That would bring the total up. So, okay. So this is, you know, this is just measures prior to the formal exclusion process. And something else we found out was in Scotland, they don't do permanent exclusions. So in fact, when our researchers went out and talked to the schools, they were very much against using the term permanent exclusion at all. So in that case, you know, we don't even have a post-exclusion section to cost. So everything sort of became prevention, intervention sections. So the way that we sort of, this sort of just reinforces that, you know, trying to find a typical pathway is very, very not going to happen. So I guess the next question, the key question really is, because there are costs and then there are costs, right? So you have costs that are sort of spent on, that are basically not doing anything. So for example, we just heard, you know, the cheapest option isn't the best. You know, you could stick the kids into one room and that's going to be cheap, but that's probably not what you want. So the question is, which costs are sort of getting you any returns? And that's when we sort of move on to the long-term outcomes. So are these interventions, are all of these measures getting you anywhere? So are they, you know, from the school level, you can say, well, are their exclusion rates going down? But from an individual student level, you know, is your goal to reintegrate them to get better academic outcomes, improve prospects in the long term? So at that point, move into the long term. And so for this section, we did a systematic review of the long-term implications. So the studies out there over, it's supposed to say 1997 to 2022. So all the papers that we could find that sort of looked at long-term consequences of school exclusion. And you can see most of them they were from the US and then the UK, and there's also Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Spain, and Chile. So that might have been limited by the fact that we only looked at papers which had at least an abstract in English. So you can see that, you know, the interest in exclusion has been increasing quite a bit. So a lot of them was sort of published in the last 10 years or so. So that's just the inclusion criteria that we use in the systematic review. So exclusion in any capacity, so suspensions or permanent exclusions, they do, you know, you can probably predict this. They have adverse effects on all long-term well-being associated behavior. So the outcomes that have the most papers is criminal justice, and yeah, followed by education, et cetera, et cetera. So what we found is that a lot of these papers, they sort of start at the end point. So you have, okay, we're looking at a population of people who have been in jail. And then they're looking at the factors that might have contributed to that. And, you know, one of those might be school exclusion. And so it's sort of working backwards a little bit, and they're not really trying to find whether or not exclusion was a causal link, causal factor in, you know, in them being involved in criminal justice. Yeah, so I've tried to put the papers, tried to show you where the papers fell in. I don't know if this is helpful. And so basically, you can probably tell. So for criminal, so for example, criminal justice, they looked at things like probability of being arrested, convicted, incarcerated, and then, you know, for education, they looked at test scores, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also found papers that did look at long-term costs, but you can see from the numbers here that there's a lot of variability just depending on what the researchers were able to include. So, for example, there's one from a long time ago that was estimating it to be around $45,000 between the ages of 12 and 19.5. But then if you look at the one from 2016, they looked at a lifetime, and so the social impact, they included earnings, involvement in criminal justice system, personal health, and, you know, these numbers sort of, they can balloon quite a bit, and that's not even all just inflation. So yeah, so you can sort of see the scope of this problem in economic terms, but it's very hard to sort of pin down a number that you could sort of just throw out there. Yeah, so talking about further research, I think I probably spent a lot of time during this project complaining about the fact that we don't have enough data. So I think collection of data regarding resource use, because when you talk about costs of exclusion, you really do need to think about everything that's involved and not just, you know, the very visible ones. And we probably need some sort of overarching framework for how to account for these costs. And then also the cost of not excluding. So you can say, so I think there are studies out there that show, okay, students who go, you know, graduate from mainstream school, they do, you know, they have better outcomes than someone who comes out of the alternative providers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a student who was put into alternative provision, if you just force them to go back to school, that would, you know, have the outcome that everyone else did, if that makes sense. So if you're talking about the cost of not excluding, that's even more complicated. You know, and then for the long-term follow-ups, that is one of the main issues that we have when we talk to people, alternative providers and schools. It's very, very easy to lose track of students once they're excluded. So they're sort of lost to follow-up. And then so we don't know how to measure cost effectiveness, essentially. You know, you invest money in these measures, you don't know whether they're successful or not. And again, how do you define success? So is being in alternative provision necessarily the bad outcome? Because there are people who say, well, you know, the students, they like being in these smaller groups, for example. But, so, you know, they might be happier, but does that mean, you know, they go on to become more successful, et cetera, et cetera? It's all a matter of balance. So, yeah, so to, you know, when we're trying to allocate resources, you know, how much money do you want to put into inclusion tactics, for example? And then, you know, you have to sort of look at the costs of not acting. And all of this is just to say we really, really need more data. So, like, I mean, you know, for the students out there, when they just teach you all these wonderful ways of analyzing data, they don't tell you that the most frustrating part is not getting any. Yeah, so that is basically what I have to say, and thank you.
Let's open up the floor to questions. Let me know if you've got a question. And do wait for the roving mic to come to you, as and when you do have a question, please, and let us know who you are and where you're from. Okay, so a couple down the front here, Deb, and next to Deb.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, everybody. Great presentations. Really enjoyed them. I particularly enjoyed Mathew and Dan's presentation. It's great for us at an education event to have a legal perspective. Thank you. I'm examining an education doctorate on Monday afternoon, so obviously I've just finished reading it several times and writing the report on it. and it was on the role of student voice or lack of student voice in governing bodies. And I was really interested, Mathew, in your comment about the fact that you have a representative who is there from the head teacher and from the governing body, but there is no other real form of representation. And I'm really interested in the idea that in lots of other areas of our social policy now, particularly health in hospitals, patient liaison, advisory services, and all sorts of things, we have advocacy. And that advocacy is getting increasingly good on occasion at listening to stakeholders and stakeholder needs. And I think from the day-to-day work I do, I think our children and the children's perspective is being forgotten. So I wondered what you thought.
Should we maybe take two and then respond to both?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the other presenters as well this evening, all the presenters to be fair, for a very thought-provoking symposium. My question goes to Feyisa. Feyisa, I'd like a little bit more on off-rolling. I think having reviewed your monograph that you showed us all earlier this evening for the British Journal of Education Studies, I'd just like to say a little bit more. I think it's coming from colleagues as well on the panel about off-rolling and how influential an issue it is today in February 2024. And again, how does education address it? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better?
Okay, thanks. Okay, who wants to address first?
Well, shall I just say something about student involvement in governing bodies decisions? I think your idea of trying to introduce some sort of advocacy system in the broad sense is a very good one, actually. Typically, in my experience, the excluded pupil won't attend the governing body meeting and won't speak. There's no reason why they couldn't, if that was thought appropriate. There are a number of reasons why it might not be. The first is that it tends to be a very upsetting environment for them, understandably, because the whole discussion is generally about how awful they are. And so there are welfare reasons for them not to be there. The other is that, frankly, sometimes you might think they might say something which is not going to help them if they're there and being involved. But yes, typically they're not there, but sometimes they are. But I think even if you've got a representative, and obviously their parents will usually be there or their guardian, and they can sort of speak on their behalf, I think the ability of that to hit home with the governors is rather limited, because there is always this suspicion that the representative, particularly if they're a lawyer, is not really trustworthy in terms of communicating things which can be relied on. And I think having a sort of independent advocate who can communicate A, this child's views, and B, what views of children in this position more widely, would be actually a very, very useful thing, and not something I've actually thought about before, I have to say, but a very good idea.
It makes sense to me as well. I mean, this process is totally stacked against the child once you get to the governing body stage. So anything, you know, is a good idea, I think, particularly along those lines.
You said you want to address the question about off-rolling?
Yeah, thanks for raising that question. The first thing I would say is we don't have good data. We have to admit that. The only good data we had in earlier days was from Ofsted, who looked at year 10 and year 11, who actually concluded, this Ofsted, by the way, is an older data, 2018, which said 90,000 people did not progress from year 10 to year 11. So, and in secondary school, a big issue, it is around 4% of the population. My own experience, looking around, working with schools, that's my area of job. Yeah, a number of these head teachers who believe we will improve GCSE result and that sort of thing, they'll be using as mechanism actually to exclude some children because they can't achieve the GCSE result, and that's really their target. It is something really the Secretary of State needs to think about. It's an issue. Getting the data is not an easy thing to analyze. Ofsted is lucky, it's a government agency, the money to do it. I tried to access that through the National People Database, which is very complicated in accessing it. The sort of permission you actually require to do that sort of analysis is difficult. I have no doubt about it. There is a number of these so-called Super 8 particularly, whose main job, I'm determined to prove GCSE result, they're using that as mechanism.
Dan, do you want to say something?
Yes, on the authority, a couple of things. One is, as I mentioned, the new Ofsted, not so new anymore, Ofsted inspection framework, they can fail the schools for off-rolling. So I don't think it is quite as blatant as it used to be. The exclusions guidance also makes clear to schools they can get failed for off-rolling. I think that a lot of the problem now is kids going off the roll. Whether that is termed off-rolling or not is slightly different. It's not so much of a push or blatant push, it's a bit more of a nudge, I would say. And it's just support not being given. And the way to deal with it is, again, data. You know, Ofsted should be looking at the data. If this is in the framework, they need to be looking at the data. And ultimately, you know, if they find people doing it, or they should go out and look for people doing it, I don't think need to fail too many schools for the message to get through. They failed the school, I think it was last year, for effectively not dealing with bullying properly. You know, that was a very effective way of getting the message across that bullying needed to be dealt with.
We had a question down in front here, and anybody else? Oh yeah, and one over here as well. So let's do two again, and then.
Thank you. I'm Tony Breslin. I'm an education researcher and writer and a teacher by profession. In terms of, I'm just in the process of launching with some colleagues in the Fabian Society an education blog called Top of the Class, where we're setting out priorities for an incoming government. So the question I ask in terms of this field is there one policy shift, or maybe one legal shift, that you would like, that each of you would like to see in this area that could really shift the ground? Because it seems to me that at the moment that we're stuck where we are, and I totally hear the calls for more data, but I have this horrible feeling that the data will tell us what we already know. I know I shouldn't say that in a place like this, but we do tend to find out that, you know, it shows us that more people go to the beach in the summer. And when one looks at the associations between school exclusion, a whole range of other things. And the second thing, therefore, I just want to ask is, I'm very interested in the tension between achievement and inclusion. And you raised it, Faisal, and others, that I think the more successful over the last 20 or 30 years, we've been 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of young people, the more excluded, the 40, 30, 20, 10% become. And a significant number of that group end up in these exclusion statistics because of that. How do we shift from an attainment first system to an inclusion first system? Because it seems to me that until we have the political and educational courage to do that, I think we might not get the moves that clearly you all want to see.
Okay, thank you. And up here.
Hi, thank you. Oh God, it's loud. My name is Pippa Goodford. I'm from the Alliance for Youth Justice. And I just had a question really to take it back to your own question, and the title of the event was around, I'm somewhat of an outsider to this, so I'm genuinely curious as to the extent to which a children's rights approach actually informs both the policy and the practice, much of which you've been discussing around this issue, and particularly because the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child examined the UK and reported last year, and one of the main areas of concern that they highlighted was around this issue. So I'm interested to know, throughout some of the processes that you've already discussed, to what extent is a children's rights approach central to the discussions and the decision making?
Comment on either policy shifts or the extent to which this is a children's rights informed process. Yeah, Feyisa.
Can I just, thanks for raising that question. What do I really want to see from the next Secretary of State of Education? I'm just very worried about fragmentation of education in England. Really important, I will start thinking about it. When I say we're outlier, go to Finland, go to the United States, and go into Japan, everywhere, every country in the world, which are developed country, local accountability is there. There should be democratic accountability to the local people. We don't have that. What we actually created was, we fragmented the education system. We don't really talk to each other, really. I'm not saying academy is not a good one, but I think academy can raise achievement, but it's really important to start talking, particularly local authority play a key role in this issue in terms of democratic accountability. I particularly wanted to say admissions are really be done through local system. That will probably change that situation. I would really want to see also funding, actually. Funding is important. I want children to be educated in school. One of the reasons some schools say, sorry, the reason I'm excluded, I don't have really money to really manage it at school level. They can't manage at school level if they have money. We are one of the richest countries in the world, really. I don't see any reason why money cannot fund, especially educational need, all these children really go to school with it, from school. So we did work it very well through national strategies, lending challenge, how many of you know? We managed to close achievement gap through lending challenge, raise achievement in this country. It can be done, but they need to think about the future of education in this country.
We're doing it all.
Well, yeah. Let's go one on policy shifts. What policy shifts are needed, and how far is a children's rights perspective?
Policy shifts, other than money, which is not so much policy, it just needs to happen. A few things. One, I agree on respect to the framework and the issues with accountability in academies. There's just no overarching sort of strategy at a local level. I used to be a local authority lawyer. Sometimes if a local authority school was doing silly things, trying to kick kids out, which ultimately the local authority would have to pick up, I could speak to my Director of Education, tell him to speak to the head teacher and do what I was suggesting, which was also, there was a legality issue, hence why I was involved. That doesn't exist now. So there's effectively, I suppose, trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. In terms of simple things that don't cost money, simpler things than putting it back together again that don't cost money, stopping the use of isolation in the way that it's currently used. It really is not, the new guidance is better than what there was, but it just should not be used in the way that it's still being used. It is very bad for kids, particularly their mental health, doesn't help with education. In respect to the data, I note there are things about the data, but there is data that we already have that is out there that is not being used. As I said, there are all these disproportionalities. The analysis can be done, people can work out where the problem is, even at a school level or at a teacher level or at a department level. It's not complicated. All that it requires is a little bit of understanding of statistics. And then once you work out where the problems are, hopefully you can, through training, education, whatever, try and deal with them. My suspicion is that at the moment, because no one looks at the data, even though they have the data, they don't know what's going on, and that is relatively cheap particularly with regard to SEN and ethnicity issues. Other things was, in terms of policy, the sort of inclusion first type philosophy, trying to keep the kids at the school. Just because it's in my mind, because it's what I've been doing today. You know, the school has its own, the school I'm dealing with has its own internal alternative provision, it's called, which effectively, so far as I understand from Mum, is quite well resourced and very good. And her son who's in there, you know, is doing well in it. He's not kicked out of the school. The issue, effectively, that I'm dealing with is a resourcing one, because they're putting kids in it for half a day. So that is, you know, in-school behaviour units, keeping them in school and resourcing. And then children's rights, does it inform factors? Unfortunately, not as much as it should. So far as I can tell, trying to enforce those rights.
Okay, Mathew and Kyann, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I'll come at both questions, if I may, from the confines of the talk that I gave. Obviously, I have broader experience and ideas, but it's probably helpful if I do that. And can I think first about children's rights? As I've said, the test that's generally applied in relation to exclusion doesn't focus on the rights of the child in question. It focuses on behaviour and it focuses on harm to others. In principle, everybody making a decision in the state should also take into account at least the interests of the child being excluded, if I can use that term rather than rights. And my experience of that is that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I think it's quite easy not to, not necessarily in bad faith, but just because you can kind of lose sight of it because you are so focused on these sort of questions and the guidance of how serious was the misbehaviour and what's the impact on others. But they should be under the current framework, and as I say, they often do, and generally when you get to the review panel stage, they're well equipped enough to do that. There is certainly a case to be made that that should, both as a matter of principle and practice, have a much greater priority in the decision-making process. I think it probably should. Of course, it is right to acknowledge and fair to acknowledge that the excluded child is not the only child with rights and interests which bear upon that decision. There are other children at the school whose rights and interests may be impacted by that child's behaviour as well. And that takes me slightly on to sort of policy shifts, and again I'm just going to think about the appeal process. If we are going to have a system where exclusions are permitted, or permanent exclusions are permitted at all, probably, technically speaking, we've got the right sort of legal tests to apply. There's a case to be made that they should be more strict, but they sort of focus on the right sort of issues. I think that the shift that's probably needed is one partly of attitudes in terms of how prevailing views inform the application of those tests. But with almost all these sorts of problems, the real problem, I think, is resources. Resources is a problem partly because it restricts the level of support that can be provided to children in that situation. And then partly because of the knock-on effect of that, it poisons attitudes. So you tend to find, people, most head teachers, most governing bodies, most teachers are really doing their best and they don't want to exclude children. And we do get these cases where people are behaving in bad faith and they're doing bad things that they absolutely shouldn't be doing. But usually they're struggling for one reason or another and can't see another way through. Sometimes that's because they've got the wrong attitude, but sometimes that's because they just haven't got the resources to do what they really need. So that's one policy shift I would like to see, but every single aspect of public life could do with more resources. So that's one. One other thing which has occurred to me before and occurs to me again now is that one possible change is that we could think about, we as a society, think about removing from the head teacher the responsibility from deciding whether a child should be excluded or not. Because you tend to find head teachers that obviously they're in the midst of things, they're right at the coalface. They can react, however hard they try, in a knee-jerk way. There may be a case for saying if we're going to have permanent exclusions at all, and some societies don't have them, then all of them should be made by an independent body, or even potentially the governing body. At least that's one step removed. And the governing body could make the decision having the interests of the school properly in mind, but not so close to the issues that they are influenced by that sort of closeness to it. And then not having this situation where their friend and colleague, the head teacher, has already made a decision which they're being asked to interfere with. They can come at it genuinely with a fresh mind. So that's just a possibility that I throw out there.
Okay. And Kyann, lastly, anything you wanted to add on policy change or children's rights?
I'm not really well placed to talk about the policy. I think from my perspective, I mean, yeah, give them more money. But I think I would be most interested in seeing some sort of work being done on showing what the money is achieving. So, you have, when you try and argue for funding, a really good argument would be, if you give us this much money, we'll save you this much money down the line. But at the moment, it's just very hard to sort of show that, because we don't know what these interventions, what these preventative measures, whether they are effective, and whether the way that these outcomes are measured is the best way to do that. So, for example, whether is the best thing to do to bring, to rule out permanent exclusion. Scotland would say yes, but I don't think that's something that's going to be realistic in England for a long time, and if ever. So not really policy related, but just like to more observation. Thank you.
A research agenda for the future.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay, thanks. We are at go on very quickly. One last. Sorry, two more. Okay, but we're okay. You have to make it very quick, because I've realised it's 2 minutes past 8. Okay.
Warwick Mansell, freelance education journalist. I'm running the website Education Uncovered. I'm sort of coming across a lot of this stuff increasingly at the moment, following the Academy's policy in particular, and looking at sort of particularly tough approaches to school discipline, isolation, writing about that a lot. I just wanted, it's coming through a little bit in the answer to the last question, but is the philosophy in schools now that have this tough approach, do you get the sense that the children who are put in isolation, their interests really are felt to matter? Or is it more, we're just thinking about the children, we're keeping them away from the other kids, and that's what matters? And legally, does it matter what happens to these children in the isolation? Just very briefly, a parent was making the point to me of a child who'd been put in isolation repeatedly, that very little education was going on there. And then I wonder if advocates of this system really, in the end, are they really worried about that? Are they just trying to get the kids out of the way?
Okay, and very last question.
I just thought I'd throw some good news in.
Go on.
And it's a struggle to do so. My name's Pastor, so I've done stuff around exclusions for some years. It is the zero excluding schools, better still the zero excluding consortia. And they do exist, they can be found, and they are admirable. The teachers are soaking up a lot, but they're clever, and they work. If only we could make the morality of it, not just children's rights side of it, but our duty of care, if we could bring that to the fore, it could work. It needs funding. Everything needs funding.
Needs funding. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, just any final comment on these last two questions? Last two comments.
I'll deal with the isolation briefly. Sometimes it doesn't, it's just a kid who randomly gets stuck in isolation for a day. They only go there once. That's the end of the story. The issue is people repeatedly being put in, and I think it's done because it's a cheap way of getting them out of circulation. I think that's the main issue, and it can often have very serious long-term effects on these children. Including them not coming to school again or on a regular basis. I think it's not problematic for every child. For some children, they might spend one day there and think, I'm going to be a good, a good boy or a good girl for the rest of the time at school. It's the people who put in it repeatedly that is the issue. Or people who put in once and have an adverse reaction.
Can I just final about
Last word, go on. Yeah.
We need to remember there are a number of schools actually determined not to exclude children. We do have a lot of good practices in this country. What we need to do is actually sharing those good practices, which Carl actually raised it. And zero exclusion is really possible. I actually visit about 7 or 8 schools who have the last 7 years have not excluded children. So we do have good practice, but we could really share that. But at the moment, there is no mechanism to do that.
Okay.
No, it was just when you were just talking about sharing good practice, that was part of the question, because I was just interested in the point when you said that, Scotland has no exclusions. I was just wondering if you know how they manage situations there, why they don't exclude at all in Scotland. I mean, what is their alternative? And then you're talking about sharing good practice as well, which seems there must be schools that do have this practice, and it shouldn't, as you say, this be shared among,
I think it might be one that we have to take out to the reception. Okay, we're over time, so thank you very much to all the speakers.